Welcome into another episode of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil, Jared Mack here. A bit of a delay. I was in Hawaii, which was very, very nice. I don't know, maybe I have a bit of a tan. Probably not. I don't really do that personally very well. Sorry, Jared. I know you might have a little bit easier time with that. I was sitting by the beach all day, figuring I was going to look a little different. I came back. I think I'm the same tone. But we had planned on doing a breakdown of the offensive two deep, the defensive two deep, shortly after the spring game. That's kind of the time to do such things. A little bit of a delay here. Hopefully fans are excited to still kind of break all of this down. And in fact, the timing might have worked out a little better for today's show, where we're going to focus on the defensive side because Oregon's made a few additions. So the 2D predictions we made previously may not have been particularly accurate, considering that before.
What's going on out there?
I have no idea. That's I have a neighbor above me who's very, very loud. So apologies for all of that. No, can't really explain it. So we're going to just kind of jump in here. We're going to run through the defensive line. We're going to look at the linebackers. We're going to look at the secondary and just kind of what are Jared's thoughts. He's the one who handles defense for the site here for our defensive, or our two deeps, I should say. I handle offense on Monday. We will be starting to look at the offense, kind of an inverse of how we normally handle this. But like I said, the additions of Derek Harmon from Michigan State and Peyton Woodyard from Alabama kind of add another wrinkle. We haven't addressed it on the podcast. Figured we'd kind of start there. So I'm just going to send it over to you, Jared. Defensive line. This was a group that we had, I think, a lot of questions going into spring, a lot of questions going into the spring game. And they certainly, to me, were probably the group that maybe impressed or surprised me the most from the spring game. Anything big change for you coming out of this? And then I guess big picture, where does Derek Harmon fit in this for you?
Well, big picture, I have Harmon as a starter. I don't think that's up for really any debate. He's going to be one of the best defensive linemen on the team next year. I'm not sure what the hierarchy is going to be there yet. I need to watch more football before I'd establish that. I'll have him starting over Amari Washington at nose tackle. If you're watching the podcast, I'm looking over to my left. You're right. That's just because my monitor's over here, and that's where my two deep is. So I don't want to mess up. I want to have that up. But I'll have Derek Harmon starting at nose and Jamari Caldwell starting at defensive tackle. If you think it should be the other way around, be my guest. Like, I'm not a football coach. I am not Tosh Lupoy or Dan Lanning, and I'm not in charge of actually figuring this out. I just thought that Caldwell played basically strictly defensive tackle last season at Houston. I know he, in an interview that we had with him pre-spring game, he said that he's been working at nose. It is what it is. Like, if he's going to play nose, if he's going to play defensive tackle, I don't really think it's going to matter too much. But those two guys are going to be on the interior, and then Jordan Birch and Mateo Uiagalelei and either Tatum Tuioti or Blake Purchase or Marion Winston. Like, that edge outside linebacker Sam Jack position is just going to change. But those four guys that I mentioned, Uiagalelei, Purchase, Tuioti, and Amarion Winston are the four that I expect to see the most from. And maybe there's a guy or two who jumps in there as well from last year's class. But as of now, the backups are Ashton Porter at defensive end. I'm not overly confident with that one. I think he's like the backup DN for right now, but there's a lot of options who could be out there. Like, I just don't know really who plays where because they interchange a lot of guys. We saw a spring game where that's not like the full roster that they were throwing out there. It's divided into two. So I think by the time the season rolls around, we'll have a better understanding. But I have Ashton Porter there. I had Ben Roberts as the backup nose tackle, but he has since left the program. Yes. So now Amari Washington is the backup nose tackle behind Derek Harmon. Keon Ware-Hudson behind Jamari Caldwell, and then the four outside linebackers that I mentioned. One of those guys could start. One of them could be the backups. Like, it's all basically going to depend on whatever the situation is against another team. If it's a run-heavy team, they're probably going to put more Tatum, Tuioti, and Mateo out there rather than Amarion and Blake Purchase just as the bigger dudes. But they're going to need somebody to kind of replace Mace Funa's really good rush defense. So that's what I have for the defensive line, which became a significant strength of the defense following Harmon's commitment, because that was my biggest question mark. My biggest gripe with the defense was what's the interior going to look like? I know a lot of people were like, they don't need defensive linemen. Like they have all these young guys. Well, they went out and got 2 of the top 10 interior defensive linemen in the country in the transfer portal. So they clearly needed, and they thought that they needed interior defensive line help, and they went out and got it. So I think that was a huge, just ginormous addition, getting Derek Harmon there at the end of the transfer portal cycle.
Just looking at it, it looks so much better than I think we thought it
Significantly
would
better.
be. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, just kind of going like if you're starting 3, you know, in terms of guys with a hand down primarily are Birch, Harmon, and Caldwell. That's like 3 guys who are all conference caliber players. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
mean, we just saw Harmon have a really great season last year at Michigan State. Same with Caldwell at Houston. And Caldwell really kind of an interesting story going through it. I hope somebody writes a more expansive feature with his. Kind of had the similar thing as Kyrie Jackson, where he kind of gave up football for a little bit, was able to kind of get his foot in the door at a junior college, worked his way up, and now he's somebody who you look at these, early 25 mock drafts, and he's like first round, second round kind of a guy. So really excited to watch him play. I'm with you, Jared, where it's like Tony Tuioti and Tosh Lupoy talked about him playing more nose tackle and the value of that. Well, then they went out and added Derek Harmon, who I think is probably more prototypically playing that sort of a position. But again, we're not football coaches, and this is just like kind of it's just, looking at where he's played historically, that makes more sense. Regardless, that's one heck of a trio there that I think Oregon fans should be really excited about. And the depth looks better now, where you can move Amari to being kind of a second string guy.
Yeah.
Keon's a veteran guy. I agree. Ashton Porter is probably the one spot that is the hardest to project of like who really is, but he's not a bad player. And everything we heard this spring was really positive about Ashton.
He looked good in the spring game. He was going against Connerly for most of it. And I think he can be that third down edge rusher, or on, like as a defensive end, and maybe they slide Birch on the inside and take off Harmon and keep Caldwell as the interior. But I don't know. That's the thing. Like I am not Coach Tuioti here.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to act like I am. I'm not going to sit here and tell somebody why they're wrong and why I'm right for having Ashton Porter there. Like, I just think that that's maybe the most logical answer, and that's why I put it down in, well, not on paper, but I guess on the internet.
There you go. Yeah, no, maybe someone's printing them out and reading them. I don't know if that still happens. My dad used to do that decades ago. He would like print out things from the internet. You could have just read on the internet, but you would like to look at them like that. Sorry, Dad, taking astray. The edge group, I'm so excited about. Just the fact that there's these 4 sophomores that are kind of all developing together, and then you bring in a Porter. You have a Jaden Moore, who's somebody who again kind of got quite a bit of name recognition, at least from players this spring. Who are some of like the interior guys that you think are next up? Because obviously, I think you feel really good about Washington, Caldwell. You feel good about Harmon, obviously, Keon Ware Hudson's experience. But now that Roberts is gone, and by the way, Ben Roberts had I thought a really good spring game. Like I was kind of excited. I was coming out of that going like, this guy's maybe ready to do some stuff. And then of course he hits the portal. Like Mekeel Gardner is a name to know. Like who else are you kind of like? Is there anybody else in that group that you're kind of excited about or that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, Mekeel Gardner is another guy who a lot of people brought up by name. I think Tuioti brought it up. Tony brought it up specifically during our interview with him. Terrence Green is another guy who Coach Tuioti brought up. I'm not sure where exactly he's going to line up, but he's just a ginormous individual. So you'd like to see him get on the field. Tione Gray was a guy who I thought had a good spring game. He had a goal. He helped in a goal line stand. I want to point out that I was more than fully comfortable with Amari Washington being the starter, and I originally had him as the starter until the Harmon edition. Getting to go on the field in the spring game and watch Washington, just his like jump off the ball and his ability to push the defensive line, I thought was really just spectacular. I think that's a very hidden trait for an interior defensive lineman, and something that a lot of people don't notice is how quickly the interior guy gets off the ball and hits the center or the guard and prevents a play from really happening. Something that Jordan Scott did really well during his time here, and that made me like even more confident at the time with him being a starter. And then it's like, oh yeah, cool. He's just going to be the 6th man now. It's like, oh, all right. I guess that's okay. But yeah, Washington, Green, Mekeel Gardner, Aiden Breland and Tiona Gray as true freshmen, I think, could have an impact. I just think there's going to be more names.
Yeah.
Dan and Tosh rotated, 6, 8, 9 guys last season and had the ability to do that. We'll see if they have the ability to do that this year. I think they will. And if that's the case, then there's gonna be dudes. And there's also gonna be a lot of guys who improve over the summer, improve over fall camp. There's gonna be injuries, there's gonna be guys having to step up and move into that second or third spot in the depth chart. So those are some names to keep an eye out for, but I'm sure by August it's gonna maybe be a little bit different.
Last thought on this is just I think the baseline of this group is now so high with some of these veteran players they've brought in, and then you just
Mhm.
kind of expect some of these. We don't know. I mean, you mentioned like the entire group because that's what I would have done. I mean, there's so many names to mention that are freshmen or redshirt freshmen or true sophomores that could elevate themselves, as you said, to being contributors. That I just think you think the floor for this group is actually way higher than I had sort of suspected it would be, and like I don't know, like this is a group where I think at the end I asked you before the show to rank the position groups along the defense. I'm curious to see where you have the defensive line because going into the spring and the spring game, I think we would have easily been like, okay, they're the kind of the low man on the totem pole. You could make a case they should be above some of these groups just based upon the way things have come together. All right, let's move over to linebacker. I think we all know what the first line will look like there with Jeff and Justin back, but what do you see with the second line there and kind of any other names that popped for you?
Yeah, it's just the Justin at the Mac, Boss at the money, and then Jerry Mixon as the backup Mac linebacker, and Devin Jackson as the backup money linebacker. I think that this is pretty set in stone. I think that Devin Jackson, obviously, Coach Lupoy said that he would have been named like the most improved player on the defense over the offseason, and just his understanding of football has gotten better. And he's, always been a top tier athlete on the team, but now he can combine his athleticism and understanding of the game and changing play calls, stuff like that, which is really important to his development as a football player and as a linebacker. I thought it was interesting that when Lupoy was talking about that, he's like, "There's not there's not going to be any," but he basically said like if Jeffrey Bossa comes off the field and Devin Jackson goes on, we feel really confident about that. There's basically going to be no drop off. And I thought that was an
Mhm.
interesting point because it was clear like if Jeff got hurt last year and they had to play Devin Jackson or Jamal Hill and Bryce Bet, like whatever the combination was, like there was
Sure.
going to be some drop off. So I think that's encouraging. I've always kind of liked Jerry Mixon. He looks physically better than he did last season, which is good. He's going to need to be as the backup Mac linebacker. I have him as. I think he just carries weight better than Jackson does. Not that Devin Jackson's a small person by any means,
Hey,
but
don't
I
let him
think
hear that.
yeah, no, I love Devin Jackson. And I will, I will say that to the cows come home. But I think Jerry Mixon is just more of like just a bigger linebacker. I think that's the real separator, which what makes him a Mac linebacker. Other guys, I thought Kamar Mathudi looked good in the spring game. I thought he's bigger than I had anticipated for a true freshman, which I think is a really good sign because sometimes you get linebacker at a high school where they're like 6'2", 200, and it's like you look like a safety. We need to add like 30 pounds on you. But I think it's Matudi actually, not Matha, but I think it's Matudi.
Mm.
I heard a couple guys pronouncing it like that, but he is like 6'2", 220 right now and can add weight over the summer. So I think that's a good sign. Bryce Betcher obviously didn't play in the spring game, but we'll see if he plays in the fall.
I was going to ask you
There's
about that. What's the
yeah,
room?
there's some
What's the
stuff.
rumor?
No rumor, actual knowledge here.
Okay.
He's going to try to play in the fall. That's for sure. The only thing that could get in the way is the MLB draft, which
Mm.
he's done a good job in the last couple of weeks playing himself into a position where he might be able to get drafted. We'll see. Nothing's set in stone until it actually happens. But if that happens, then it's going to be a little more complicated. But he would like to play in the fall. So if he does, that's another name to add to the room. Braden Platt and Dylan Williams is yet to join the team, but he'll be there in the summer. So I'm not sure how much of a role he'll have, but it'll just be notable that Dylan Williams is on the team. And then Braden Platt, I thought looked fine in the spring game. There wasn't a lot from the linebackers in the spring game, but I don't think that that's a bad thing. Like if you don't notice somebody doing something, that means they're probably doing their job and it's going as planned, and they're not spectacularly good and they're not spectacularly bad. So I think that's fine. But I think the linebacker room is probably the most set in stone on the team at this point.
Dylan Williams, by the way, was with the team all spring. Like he was at like basically every practice we
He
watched,
was,
which
yeah.
was interesting. I don't know why he's wasn't enrolled, but it's like he seemed like he might have even been like living in Eugene all spring. So in terms of just like integrating himself with the team, he knows the players now. I don't know what he's allowed to do or not do in terms of going to meetings, but I assume he's got a real good feel for the defense. So I mean, I'm not sure he's going to be a contributor, but certainly somebody who has the ability to hit the ground running because he's been around. It's kind of a weird. I should have asked a couple people for clarity on what was the deal there, but it was interesting that we saw him at like probably almost every practice we watched. Matudi is a guy who physically looks the part more than just about any freshman linebacker Oregon's landed in a minute. Like he's just like you said, 220, and we don't have weights. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they list him at like 225, high 220s by the time we get to August. Like he's put together, and I think unfortunately he had a couple not great moments. We talked about it on the recap pod. He and Jay Harris met a couple times, and it went Jay's way pretty decisively.
But that's like
you're
I
right.
don't know. It's like a 21-year-old against an 18-year-old. Like,
yeah, and to be clear,
and they're the same size.
I really like this player. I think you say set in stone. Like if somebody's gonna like push their way into it, and maybe move, maybe a Jerry Mixon or whatnot gets moved off it, it would be Matudi if I was to pick one. I'm not disagreeing at all with your list because I think it's the right one, but I think that's kind of he's an interesting looking athlete. Like he reminds me of kind of like when both Jamal Hill and Jeff Bossa got here, and they were just so physically much smaller body types, but just so put together immediately. And you just kind of went, that's a guy who at least has the strength and muscle to like maybe be a contributor in some capacity early. So I would watch him. Platt, I felt the opposite about, which was weird because I think he lost a lot of weight from like end of senior year in high school up in Washington to when he got here. And he just doesn't quite look like, I think that's a guy who I expect to redshirt. And I would expect probably 2 of the 3 true freshmen to probably redshirt, assuming Bryce is able to play. Just because from a rep perspective, I bet they'd like to split those guys up. But I agree. I don't have anything else to share on kind of those guys other than I'm really fired up by everything we heard about Jeff Bossa as well. I mean, it just sounds like somebody who's really taken a leadership role, really taken kind of his responsibility, the bull by the horns, as they say. And we were really critical. I know I was kind of leading the charge after the 2022 season, but I think in 24, this is a guy who could have one of the better individual linebacker seasons we've seen from an Oregon player, probably since Troy died several years ago. And we know what Troy did. I don't want to take anything away from Noah Sewell, but he ended up being kind of limited because of how big he was. Like, I just think Jeff's going to be somebody who's becoming better in the run game. He's always been great in the pass game. He's got great instincts and is just kind of the leader out there. So I will be obviously leading the Jeff bandwagon as opposed to being somebody that was kind of criticizing and kind of confused by some of how he was playing back a couple of years ago. So the development there is really encouraging and probably something we need to talk more about with regard to Coach Lane and Coach Lepoy and even Coach Michalowski.
Him and Jacobs, I think, are going to have really important seasons to Oregon's defense. Jacobs already a Big Ten dude, transferred over from Iowa, and I think Jeff is, he was so good last year. I think a lot, obviously, because of player development and just further playing football at the linebacker position after moving from a safety. But he also added like 25, 30 pounds and was just a bigger dude and could take on running backs in the gap and kind of take on a pulling offensive lineman or at least disrupt it. And now he looks bigger. I don't know what he's going to weigh in at. I don't, not that it really matters, but he just looks bigger. He looks more put together again for the second straight year. So, I agree with you. I expect, Jeffrey to have one of the better years like an Oregon linebacker is seen, especially in the Big Ten, especially in that kind of play style where linebackers have kind of reigned supreme in the Big Ten for the last couple of seasons. And you need a good set of linebackers to do well. And I think Jacobs and Bossa is might be one of the best in the Big Ten. I don't know all of the Big Ten linebacking pairs at the top of my head. We have a whole offseason to figure that one
Mhm.
out, but I do think that they're going to be up there at the top just because of their skill and their positional versatility.
So move from linebacker now to corner first, and then we'll do safety. But these are the position groups where I would imagine you feel like you said linebacker maybe set in stone. These are the ones where it's kind of the hardest to gauge. At least that was how I felt kind of looking through this. Um, it's tough with corner because so many of the key players were unable to either participate in the spring game or any of the spring for a variety of reasons, whether it be injury in Jaleel Florence's case,
Yeah.
whether it be playing another sport in Roderick Pleasant's case, whether it be some legal issues in Dalen Austin's case, whether it be Ife Obadigwu not having enrolled yet. So there's I'm just mentioned 4 guys who could theoretically get involved here at corner who we just didn't
Mhm.
see at all really in spring. But go ahead and run through where you're at right now, and then let's have kind of a conversation about how you think this comes together. Because I find it fascinating, and I think this could be another one of the strengths of the defense if it all comes together.
Yeah, the nice thing about the 4 guys that you mentioned, the only person I have is Jaleel Florence in my 2 deep. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that Roderick Pleasant or Dalen Austin are going to make it there, or if he Obadegwu. So right now at boundary corner, I have Jabbar Muhammad with Cam Alexander as his backup, and field corner, I have Jaleel or Cam Alexander with Dante Manning as a backup. Um, this all kind of just depends on if Jaleel Florence is healthy or not by the fall. Um, we didn't get to watch a lot of football in the spring. I know we've brought up that point a lot, but that does kind of go into how I look at the depth chart. And I liked Florence from a year ago. I know he's kind of hot or cold on in Oregon fans' opinions on how well he is or how well he does as a cornerback. I think he's pretty good. I think I like the length, the size, the versatility that he provides. I think he just kind of we got Michael Penix a couple
Mm-hmm.
times, which
Yeah.
is unfortunate. That happened to a lot of people last year. But I think those moments, because they were big games, kind of stick with people, and they're like, "Oh, well, he kind of stink." I think Jaleel Florence is a good cornerback, and I think that if he's fully healthy, I'm going to have him as the starting cornerback this upcoming season. Um, Cam Alexander played in the spring game. I don't know. I thought it was fine. There weren't a lot of passing plays that went towards him. He did get cooked by Evan Stewart, but I kind of like looked the other way on that because Evan Stewart is
Well,
going to cook some people this year. Yeah,
it's just like the Michael Penix thing, where it's like you've got a top tier NFL talent who's just going to make some people look silly, and that's just the way it
right.
goes.
Yeah, and I think Cam, if you watch this tape at UTSA, is a good cover corner. He's very similar to what Jaleel Florence is, and it's like if you have 2 Jaleel Florences, either as your starter and one as your backup, like that's pretty good. I would take that. And then Dante Manning is still here. And I think no, I don't think that's a bad thing, but he's
Yeah,
here. There's been like a lot of people have been like for the last 3 years have been like, oh, well, he's gone at the end of the season. Like new coaching
sure.
staff, he's gone. It's like, oh, the transfer portal, the window is larger now. Like, oh, well, he's gonna go, and or they brought on Kyrie Jackson from the transfer portal. It's like, oh, well, Dante Manning's gone. It's like, no, he's still here and he's still a good member of the defense. I actually think this could be a good year for Dante Manning because of his role and because of the way the Big Ten officiates rather than the Pac 12. Pac 12, who was it years ago where they committed to like Florida over Oregon and USC? And I
Oh,
think they eventually transferred to USC, but
Chris something. What was his last name? I can't. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and he was like in his recruitment, he was like, "Nah, I'm gonna go to the SEC because they actually let you play physical as a corner there." And sure, maybe I don't know, but it does seem like the Pac-12 was a little lighter on their officiating standards for a cornerback. And Dante Manning is a physical corner, and he against the right competition and maybe with the right officiating can be kind of like a secret weapon in Oregon secondary. Still haven't given up hope on him. He's too good of an athlete. And I'm going to keep driving the Dante Manning hype train. But he was another guy who, got Penixed or got Caleb Williams or something like that. But I think if he's your third or honestly, if he's your fourth, you know, fourth string run or cornerback, That's pretty good, and there's also just a bunch of other dudes in that room who I think are really talented who might find their way into the 2 deep, like Sione Laulea, Dakota Fields, who had an interception in the spring
Yeah.
game, Ifeoma Badegwu. I don't know where Roderick Pleasant kind of fits in that because we didn't see him all spring, and he didn't play too much last year. And then Dalen Austin, we're not really sure what his status is going to be going into the year, but I really like him too. I thought I was highest on him than almost anybody else in that room as guys who could break the 2 deep, but we'll see what happens there eventually.
Chris Steele was the player we were talking
Chris
about.
Steele, he did
Yeah,
go back to USC, right?
I think so. I think he committed to like 4 or 5 different schools. It felt like I don't know the whole. You can give me maybe the whole career arc if you'd like. One thing on Jaleel that's interesting is you look at what Oregon's done at corner, especially over the last 2 staffs, big long rangey guys. Florence, of the names that you have in your 2 deep, is kind of the only one who fits that in terms of at least height, right? He's like
Mhm.
6'1", 6'2", long arms, pretty rangy. Both Jabbar, Cam, and Dante are all, I think, 5'10", 5'11", a little shorter. Not saying they don't.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing Dante. He said he's got like a 6'8" wingspan or something crazy. So he's got length there. But from a height perspective, Florence kind of stands out. So I do wonder in terms of just building out a rotation if there is some value with his size there. And I'm fascinated to see how this plays out because, like you said, I think all those guys have a shot. We didn't mention Nico Reed. We will in a second because he's more of a slot corner. If you got to a situation where he had to play outside corner again, like he did at the end of last year, shoot, I think he's a pretty good player, and he
He
was
can do it.
he was
Yeah.
like a good starting outside corner at Colorado for a season in 22. So, like the number of potential starting caliber players at corner, like it stands out. I think to me, Jabbar feels like the alpha right now, and certainly coming out of the spring
Yeah,
game,
100%, yeah.
he had some really really nice plays in the spring game. I know there's some folks that were kind of questioning things, but if you go watch, he had a really great pass break on a crossing route to Gary Bryant on a 3rd down play, and then just kind of watch him cover people in the field. Really didn't give anybody an opportunity to throw the ball that way for the most part. So I think he's your number one, and then it's just what do you do at the other spot to me, and just does Cam Alexander dethrone Jaleel Florence and take that spot? Does Jaleel win it back? What's Jaleel's health? Like you said, I mean, I think, Chris Hampton midway through the month of April said maybe we'd get him out there for a couple practices. That never happened. I don't know how close he was, how close, could he have, been out there doing some stuff that we didn't see? I don't know. Dan keeps things so tight-lipped, but he's certainly to me kind of for this position group, kind of the wild card, because I think if he's healthy, I would be surprised if he's not a starter, but we don't know if he's going to be healthy. And then the way he played last year with just it seems like he's had a hard time remaining on the field even when he quote unquote is healthy. So
Right.
that's a guy who I'm really high on. I think has a lot. I think he has legitimate NFL ceiling, but what is he able to do physically is kind of the question there. And you ran through. There's a ton of names. There's just a
Mhm.
lot of dudes, and
A lot of
and
talent.
and the cool part is that you could see some of these guys that like what's to stop them from moving Cam Alexander to playing slot corner if he's not one of the outside corners, and now you have 3 legitimate lockdown corners on the field together. So the same thing with Dante Manning. I know he's done quite a bit of that over his time at Oregon. I just
Right.
think this is a really deep room.
Yeah, and I think, we'll get into the rankings, but I have them pretty darn high because of
Mhm.
the depth and because of the top end talent. I think Jabbar Muhammad is maybe the most talented player on Oregon's defense. And I
Mhm.
mean, if you put him
Skeleton.
up against everybody else, like he was just spectacular last season.
Yeah.
And he, that was part of the reason why Washington, went so far with him and their defensive line. But he was a lockdown dude a season ago, and that's kind of what Oregon had at points with Kyrie Jackson, but also didn't have at points. And I think Jabbar is just going to provide that. You know exactly who's going to go against the number one of the opposing team if it's a man-on-man situation, and I think that's going to be their saving grace. And I think again, if like he's your true number one, your alpha, your lockdown cover corner, your island corner, and then if you have a trio of Jaleel or Cam Alexander or Dante Manning as your number two, or somebody like Sione Laulea who steps up and comes into fall camp and really impresses with his height and length and versatility, like that's good. That's a
Hmm.
really good two corners to have for any team in the country. So, and then coupled with the defensive line getting to the quarterback, like I think the cornerback room is really, really, really talented.
Let's slide over to safety here, and I guess let's start with Peyton Woodyard edition since we haven't really talked about it.
Mhm.
You did this two deep exercise prior to his commitment. Would you move him in there? Does he have a spot? I mean, it's weird looking at safety in part because I think you've got between Ty Sheem, Kobe Savage, and Brandon Johnson. I think you feel pretty good. And I'll just throw Nico Reed in there because I think he's a starting caliber player. Between those
Mhm.
four guys, you feel like okay, three of those guys are going to be certainly good enough to start and be quality pieces. Once you get, especially at the deep safety positions, once you kind of get behind Kobe Savage and I think Ty Sheem, who I thought had a pretty good scrimmage, by the way. That was interesting to watch because he hadn't really played deep much last year.
Well,
You just,
he's at boundary.
yeah, I'm just
Tashim is.
yeah, but I'm just talking about not nickel, not guys at the line of scrimmage. Uh, I just don't know exactly what you have. Like Aaron Flowers had some really nice moments. He's much more instinctive than you expect for a true freshman. He comes up and he's not afraid to hit. But walk us through kind of what you're looking at safety and how does Woodyard maybe change it for you?
Woodyard doesn't change it for me.
Okay,
I think it's yeah. I don't think people are gonna like to hear that. When I wrote the like how this impacts Oregon in 2024, I very nicely said I don't really think it does, but it really sets them up really well for the future. Because he's a true freshman. I know he's a transfer portal addition, but he's a member of the
right.
2024 class, and I also can't put him into the two deep without like ever seeing the lad play a college football snap. Like I don't know how his game translates from high school to the college level. I really liked him as a prospect. I thought he was the best safety on the West Coast coming out in the 2024 class. Like, I think there's reasons why he committed to Georgia so early and then eventually committed to Alabama and Nick Saban at the time before entering the portal after spring camp with Kalen DeBoer. Like, I think he's a really talented player. I just think Oregon's safety room is pretty set in stone at this point. I have Tyshim Johnson at boundary, Kobe Savage at free, and Brandon Johnson at star.
Hmm.
And I don't think anybody's jumping into that, that starting rotation other than if there's injuries or if it's certain like a personnel package. Like, we saw, I bring this up often, but Oregon against Arizona 2 years ago, where they started, four cornerbacks because Christian Gonzalez was like playing star. Um, like I don't see anybody breaking into that. And then the backups at boundary, I have Flowers, who I thought was great. Tyler Turner at free safety, which is subject to change. If there's a place where Peyton Woodyard can make an impact, it could be there. I just
Yep.
don't know. I've never seen the guy play a snap of college football other than Alabama's spring game where he didn't do a lot. And then backup star, I have Nico Reed or Solomon Davis or basically any of the cornerbacks on the team because they all cross train. I think, or even Tyshim Johnson can move back to star, but I think Nico and Solomon Davis, I thought was really good during the spring game. That certainly opened my eyes because I had no idea where he was going to play, but I thought he was really good at that star position, and that makes a lot of sense given his body type and his, he was a corner in high school. He cross trained last year. Like it made a lot of sense, and I was surprised to see how good he was. But I think his draft or not draft stock, but I think his overall stock is trending upward after the spring game. But for Woodyard, until I see it, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna lie to people and be like, yeah, no, he's gonna be like the backup free safety. Like I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think that spot that Turner occupies is to me, and I don't want to make this is going to sound like a shot at Tyler Turner, but it's based upon limited playing experience. He played like what 30, 40 snaps last year. That's the
Maybe.
spot. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's less. I was trying to be kind. Just the reality for me is that that's the spot where if a Woodyard or if a I don't even know Kamari Terrell's name we haven't mentioned. I really don't know what
Yeah.
exactly he's doing, but like if somebody's gonna take a spot in the two deep amongst these players, that's the spot to me that's open. I'm happy you brought up Solomon Davis. He was like for me, along with a couple of guys on offense, like one of my favorite. Hey, this guy, I didn't know what this guy was. Maybe he's actually pretty good.
Right.
Like,
Yep.
because it's funny when you kind of like tier the team and there's 85 scholarship players, you always kind of have a feel of like who's the bottom 10 guys who could be hitting the portal soon. And I think we just always kind of assume based upon recruiting ranking and lack of playing time last year that maybe Solomon Davis was kind of in that like, hey, let's get a Solomon Davis might transfer story ready. I don't think that's the case. And like I came away watching that going, hey, if Brandon Johnson and Nico Reed are seniors and they're done next year, this guy might be like your starting nickel in 2025. Like I wouldn't be stunned if that came to pass. Like a good tackler, a good athlete, played coverage well, had a couple really nice plays where I think did he have like 6 or 7 tackles in the spring game?
He had
you got it there?
I think he had 7. I do have it right here. Excuse my page turning, everybody who's listening.
Yeah, and it's going to be annoying for you guys. Sorry.
7. Yeah, he had 6 solo tackles. He was a good tackler in open space.
I was going to say because there are a couple times where I know fans are like, well, he let the guy catch the pass. Of course, he's going to make the tackle, but he was right on him, and it's like zero yak. Like just brings him down immediately. Had a couple nice hard hits. Like I don't know. It's a guy who, again, we're probably maybe estimating a player based upon one data point. But I came out of the spring game like you, Jared, being like, yeah, I see it. And I'm happy you included him in the 2 deep because it's a player who I think fans just don't know about. So we'll see what happens. But I think he's a name to know and somebody who like if he gets thrust into a regular role, like in certain areas of the field, I could see him being valuable. I have no idea if he's good in run support at all. I have no idea what kind of a blitzer he is, but if you're just talking purely in pass coverage and then making the play, like we saw him do that over and over again against some really good receivers. Like he was matched up on Tez for a good part of the first half of that scrimmage and didn't get, embarrassed too much. So yeah, this group's interesting though.
Yeah, I think Davis at star is different than what Nico Reed can provide at star because Davis is listed at 6 foot 215. Like that's just a bigger dude, and Nico is. I forgot what he's listed at.
I think he's like 5'10", 185, something like that.
Yeah, it was like it's no more than 5'10" or 5'11". Like those are different type of body types, which I think could, be beneficial depending on the situation. So I was very encouraged with what I saw from him. I'm not trying to make him like the hero of the defense or anything like that. Yeah. But like you said, this is a guy where it's like, I don't know what the heck he's going to do this year. Like I have no idea where he fits in at any position. And then you see him on the field, you're like, he fits in well there. He's doing fine just there. And that was it was encouraging because I think, that nickel spot, despite everybody cross-training, like, that was behind Taishim last year, if he went down with an injury, it kind of felt like that could be a weak point on the defense. And I think they just have a lot of names that could fill in at the nickel spot. But I think that's Brandon Johnson's to lose. Like I know he wasn't here on campus during the spring and he'll be here during the summer, but that dude's legit. Like I think he's going to be. Boy, I think people are going to be really surprised when they see him line up at nickel for Oregon and what he's able to do physically and get to the quarterback like that. I think he's kind of like a secret weapon because they haven't shown it off during the spring or anything like that. I think he's going to be outstanding at the star. Last thing, backup free safety, another name, Kingston Lopa.
Yeah,
just potentially, he is very similar physically looking to Brian Addison. Excuse me. I almost called him Bryson Addison for some reason. I knew that wasn't right. Very similar looking. They're both like 6'4", 6'5", like 200 pounds, just lean. I say his name as a backup free safety just because he's tall as heck and can go and basically play center field back there. And I love free safeties like that. I'm not sure it really fits in the Big Ten as much as it did with the Pac-12 and their type of offenses. But if I were, having a Madden franchise and I got to create a free safety, it would look very similar to Brian Addison and Kingston Lopa.
That was going to be my last question for you, which is, I know from our past conversations, you love the Brian Addison, Triquez Bridges theoretical safety combo. How are you feeling about the possibility of having Taishim and Kobe back there, who are both like 5'9", 5'10"?
I've talked about it all offseason. Don't love it.
It makes me a little nervous. Now, I think you're right in pointing out in the Big Ten, it might not be as big of a problem, but you just think about they've got limited range because of their size. Neither of them are like super explosive athletes. I think Taishim's pretty decent in coverage overall. I haven't seen enough of Kobe at Oregon, and unfortunately he didn't play a ton in the spring game because he got hurt. But I'm with you of kind of like, I wonder if they'll try to get creative to put a couple of bigger guys out there, just because you are looking at it's a pretty small pairing for sure at the back end.
Yeah, which is where the Lopa or the Peyton Woodyard addition, because Peyton is listed on Alabama as a 6'2", 185. So
Mm-hmm.
he'll obviously need to bulk up, but a lot of he's a 2024 kid. He's a true freshman. So a lot of those guys are going to need to bulk up, but that's where they could. It's not a great thing. It's something I talked about all off season or during the winter portal. It was like, go get a tall safety, because I think that's going to be really, really beneficial to the defense. But I think I'm still like bird brain Pac-12 mode, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like they're going to go against USC and Washington's weird Jed Fish offense, which eventually they will go against. But they're also going to go against Illinois and Purdue and Ohio State, which in recent years, like specifically last year, weren't a big deep ball threat team. Or Michigan State and Jonathan Smith, we all know he's not going to be a deep ball threat. Like, it makes more sense to have Savage and Taishim just as two heavy hitters back there in the secondary. But I am a big proponent of getting somebody really tall, long, and fast as your free safety. But it's okay. I'm not a coach.
Yeah, I share those concerns, but we'll see. I have no idea. And we'll see what happens with these position groups, because this is our best guess and I think a pretty accurate representation of where things are at this moment. But we will get to August and see like how much of this holds water. Like, I wouldn't
Probably
be
none.
right. I mean, some of it will, Jared, but like, nah. Just
I don't know anything.
0 for 22. Just none of them is right. Everybody's out of position. Jordan Birch is playing safety now.
Yeah, he'd be tall.
He would be tall. Yeah, he would fit that. He would fit it. Okay, so last thing we talked about kind of going through is, how would you rank these groups? I thought this would be kind of interesting, because I went through and ranked all the position groups on the team on Thursday. I didn't do it as, I guess, specifically because I just had like defensive backs grouped together and defensive line grouped together, and you have the option to kind of split them up a little bit more. But there's like very few weak spots on this entire team, and like, the funny for me, where I landed was I had defensive backs, which again was a combination of corners and safeties, as the bottom group. And then I'm going through this exercise and we go, my gosh, they've got like 6 starting corners. That feels ridiculous. So how would you actually put this together in terms of ranking the groups?
Linebacker, cornerback, defensive line, safety.
Yeah.
So linebacker, we went through it, obviously. I mean, we went through all of these position groups, but linebacker is the most set in stone. And I think, the combination of Bassa and Jacobs is, again, probably one of the better ones in the Big Ten, that I think has the potential to have a really good season there. I think that's maybe not the most high end talent, like when you look at maybe the D line or the cornerback room, but then you have like the two deep with Jerry Mixon and Devin Jackson. You're like, I know what I'm getting there, and there's just not a lot of question marks. So I think that's the number one. Cornerback, again, I think the high of what Jabbar Muhammad can provide in the secondary is too good a value. And then I think you have 3 or 4 dudes that you can actually comfortably rely on the outside, and Florence Alexander and Dante Manning. And then, the 7 to 9 dudes behind them that are just, former top 100 prospects, or guys like Ifeoma Badegwu, who aren't even on campus yet, but a top 75 prospect in the country. Dakota Fields is 6'2", 195, is a true, like, just, you just take enough shots at the target, one of them's going to hit the bullseye. And I think there's a ton of dudes, a ton of shots in that room. So that's why I have them at number 2. D-line, maybe too low, but I put them 3rd just because I still don't know what the backups look like, other than Amari Washington, and Keon Ware-Hudson. But I know what Keon Ware-Hudson looks like. And so I'm like, okay, I know that, but I don't know what Terrence Green will do. I don't know what Michael Gardner would do. I didn't know what Ben Roberts could do, but he's no longer on the team. I don't know who the backup defensive end is, so we talked about that. And I think the outside linebacking group I lumped into them. I think they really raise the floor for them. I still think like they're a high ceiling, high floor group, and I think they're really talented. And the Derek Harmon edition certainly helps, but I personally have question marks back there. So that's why the third, and then the safety room, least valuable position on the entire defense.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Like it's why like you never draft a first round safety. Obviously a really good safety can help a lot, and I think Oregon has some good ones, but I just have a lot of the question marks still. It's like, yeah, Dakota Fields was really good in the spring game, but I'd like to see it during the season and against Big Ten play and not against guys he's been practicing against for the last 6 weeks. I don't know who the backup free safety is going to be. And then the star position, like Brandon Johnson wasn't on campus.
yeah.
I love him. I think he's going to be great. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised how often he's going after the quarterback and getting tackles for loss. But I haven't seen him play a snap in an Oregon uniform. So
For what it's worth, I would have ranked them identically to you. I think the ceiling at corner is higher than the ceiling at linebacker, but I'm
certainly.
so confident about the two guys that are starting there that it's
Yep.
just like I just know they're going to have two of the best 10 linebackers in the Big Ten. Like I feel very confident saying that. Corner, they might have like you could convincingly have like 4 of the top 12 or something like that. I don't know, but we don't know exactly how it comes together. So I think it's a fun discussion. And then the defensive line, like you said, that they really raised their floor with the addition of Harmon. Carl Caldwell looks the part, super explosive, kind of similar to, we talk about Amari Washington earlier. Similar thing with these are just, guys with great feet for being huge, huge. A dancing bear is the term I've heard people use. That's the kind of
Gershon Yabusele, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then honestly, the thing I'm most excited to watch defensively is probably just these young edge guys develop. I mean, we haven't even mentioned Elijah Rushing's name the whole podcast, and I think that's right because I think he's like at best like their 5th or 6th edge guy, and that speaks to how talented the room is. And I just think you keep as many of these guys together as you can through 25. Like, think about how good they're going to be as seniors, assuming most of these guys are together. With 3 or 4 years of development. I think there's a lot to be excited about there. A lot to be excited about in general in defense. Like just like going through this whole exercise, this should be a kick-ass defense and probably one of the better defenses we've seen at Oregon in a minute. 2019 stands out to me as the best defense I've personally covered. Last year's group had some moments, but 2019 is kind of what you're chasing. I think this team has the talent to kind of get there. I mean, they don't have the Troy Dye, KT were kind of the star guys up front. They had great corners. They ended up having Brady Breeze emerge as safety. Like, I just look at this team and think there's a chance that we're going to come out of this being like, was this one of the better defenses Oregon's produced, not only in the last decade or so, but ever? So I don't know if you feel the same way, Jared, but I just think they're really loaded. And this is what you expected when you hired a defensive coach of Dan Lanning's caliber who had done this at Georgia. He is building a Georgia-esque type defense out west. And shoot, I think in the Big Ten, I think people are going to be surprised by how athletic, how tough, and how, I guess, just big they are. I mean, that defensive front is going to have like 3 or 4 guys that play a lot that are going to be like 6'5", 330 or more. I mean, it's just a massive group of people.
Right. And I think you touched on it there at the end of just how athletic this unit is. I think that's like the biggest difference maker is like you looked at Dan's defenses at Georgia, and even if you look at Michigan's defense last year, which was one of the best in the country, that's a lot of big dudes that all can move at every position. Oregon's safety room, we talked about how they're not tall, which is fine. Not everybody has to be tall, but they're big and they can move. Like Tyshim Johnson must have gained 15 pounds of muscle this offseason. He looks like excuse my French, a brick shit house out there. And boy, am I excited to watch him run around. And I think that's the major thing. They're all huge. Everybody can move. And you have elite top end talent on the corners, linebacker, defensive line. Like it's a potential really special group. And I feel the same way where, we could be here in January or February looking back and being like, damn, that was quite a defense. But I encourage everybody listening to do their own exercise and try to figure out like the two deep, because at one point you just kind of like, there's a lot of names where you're like, how am I going to get this person into the two deep? And it's good. It's not like it's a bad thing. And I'm not saying like, again, I'm not saying that I'm right here. I tried my best. Like there's a lot of names here. There's a lot of people who I left out, who I'm sure there's going to be comments or takes where it's like you should have put them in, and maybe I should have, and maybe we'll find out in August and September that they are a part of the two deep. But for now, after the spring camp and all we saw, like I think this is decent. We'll see, but it's tough because there's a lot of talent on the team, and there's a lot of positional versatility. There's a lot of opportunities in some position groups, but it's a good unit. And honestly, adding Harmon more so than Woodyard at the end um, only made my confidence level in the defense increase. And you know me, I'm not somebody here who's here to tell everybody how good the Oregon Ducks are. I'm here to
No.
say if things are bad, things are bad. If things are good, things are good. This is really good. This defense could be really, really, really good. They've done everything they needed to do. And a year after they had one of the better defenses in the Pac-12, I think they got better just basically across the board. So, and that's hard to do, but they did it pretty easily.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and comment. Tell us how right, how wrong we were.
Or not.
Or don't. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine.
So yeah, don't. If you do, be kind of nice if you can. That would be great. We'll be back on Monday. Jared and I will be breaking down the Oregon offense, doing the exact same exercise, running through each position group, kind of what we think the two deep looks like, throwing out some names that didn't make it, and then kind of I'll do my best to rank those positions, which I think is easier. I think offense in general is easier than defense right now to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think both are really talented, and I'm sure we're going to finish that podcast feeling kind of saying the same sort of things. Like this could be one of the better offenses since X, Y, or Z. Although last year's offense is going to be really good, really hard to match or surpass. So, but thanks for listening to this episode of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Erik, Skopil, and Jared Mack signing off.
Peace.